Well, good afternoon, everyone. As always, it is delightful to see you all this evening. Um, Welcome to the MSD of Wayne Township Second Equity Staff Circle. Today's title is What and How We Teach Our Students Makes a Difference. We can't ignore the elephant in curriculum, instruction, and assessment. As always, it is an honor to be the lead facilitator of this work and to partner with 12 other leadership team members, in which, without the tremendous support from our superintendent of schools, Dr. Jeff Butts, and the MSD of Wayne Township School Board, none of this would be possible. Today, we want to take a look at the role of CIA, not just the department, but in the work we do in terms of teaching, learning, and assessing our students. We are thankful for each panelist today who is going to give us their truth in these areas from a district, school, and classroom perspective. As I call each panelist's names, if you could wave and say hello, and then we will get right into the questions. So we'll start off with Miss Aretha Britton, the principal at Rhoades Elementary. Mrs. Megan Campbell, assistant principal at Lyndhurst 7th and 8th grade center. Mr. Dominic Day, secondary curriculum coordinator, Education Center. Mr. Jake DeWitt, elementary teacher at Rhoades Elementary. Mr. Stephen Gardner, curriculum coordinator at the Education Center. Mrs. Jennifer McCann Thomas, EL teacher at Westlake Elementary. Dr. Ann Olson, elementary curriculum coordinator, Education Center. Miss Judy Stegman, assistant superintendent for academics, Education Center. Mr. Sherman Woodard, guidance director at Ben Davis High School. Mr. Dante Brown, special services administrator at Ben Davis High School. So again, special thanks to all of our panelists for this afternoon. A few housekeeping items. This session is already being recorded and it will be available and posted to the Wayne Equity YouTube channel within a week from today. So if you have colleagues who are unavailable, please direct them to the Wayne Equity channel. Also, as we go through the questions and answers, each panelist will have approximately 2 to 3 minutes to answer. So you may not get all of the answer that you would like to have today, because they will try to be as concise as possible in order to be respectful of your time. But again, this session will be recorded. And also, if you have any questions that we do not get to, please definitely try to record your questions in the chat. And if we have time, because we will stop promptly at 6 p.m., then we will try to answer your questions. If not, we will revisit your question at a later date. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And our first question was actually submitted by a staff member at our last staff equity circle. And that is one of the reasons why we decided to devote today's session entirely to curriculum instruction and assessment. So this question goes to Miss Judy Stegeman. And the question is, how will Wayne Township actively try to dismantle the white supremacy that is embedded in our curriculum and our state standards?
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I appreciate being invited to participate today. Let's start with the state standards end of that question. We have to ask ourselves questions like, who sets the standards? Are they people of color? Are they teachers who embody a socio-political consciousness? How do we get involved as a district and as individuals? And can Wayne actually influence this process? To give you some background, the way the DOE does this is they bring groups together to set state standards and assessments. And to do this work, they invite participants from across the state. Our CIA department leaders watch for these announcements and encourage Wayne staff to participate. Many times, a Wayne staff member will receive an invitation to participate in these groups. The Wayne influence is real, and we can really make our voices heard. Oftentimes at the state level, we think that, oh, that's too big, we can't do that. But there was a really good example a few years ago in Wayne where we went up against a new measure for student growth on state assessments. This was an example of power and privilege making decisions to benefit some and not others. In Wayne, with the encouragement of Dr. Butts and our school board, we produced a website where districts from across the state could drop data to see how the changes in the metrics and the growth measures would impact their school performance. We presented our findings to superintendents across the state. We organized outreach. Dr. Butts and several staff members waited over 10 hours on a snowy February day to testify at a state board meeting, and the state listened. So there is a voice for individuals and districts at the state level. When we look at state curriculum or state standards, they inform our local curriculum. Every 6 years, our curriculum is reviewed, updated, and materials are purchased. We're working to ensure that the histories and identities of our students are included and celebrated in our curriculum. As educators, we're working to create spaces where curriculum and instruction include and engage all students in productive struggle. When teachers build authentic partnerships with students while incorporating productive struggle, it will lead to independent learners who can problem solve and think critically. These are the future leaders we need in our world. Thank you, Dr. Harris.
All right, thank you. One of the things you mentioned is that, with the state standards, we utilize those state standards to inform the curriculum. So knowing that we have both an elementary curriculum coordinator and a secondary curriculum coordinator, and we'll start with Dr. Olson. Hope you don't mind, Mr. Day. She'll answer the question from an elementary perspective and then secondary. So one of the questions we ask is, who wrote the curriculum the district has adopted? And second part, did experts who share and know the cultural identities of the students and their families design it? Dr. Olson, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. You ask a loaded question about experts there. And I think that when I hear that question, I have to think about who do we say are the experts? Are the experts people who are far away from our community? Or are the experts the people who are right here in our community teaching our children? And when you really think about where we've been with curriculum and instruction over the last 20 years, particularly with our district curriculum, you can see we've been trying to struggle with that question of who are the experts for a long time. 20 years ago, we had paced standards by quarter, and really the expertise was housed right in the classroom for curriculum development. We said as a district, here are the standards we're going to address every grading period. Teachers, you figure it out. You do what you need to do. And we saw that with that approach, we had a lot of inequity in terms of what we were seeing across the district in curriculum, and that we didn't really actually have a curriculum because we had standards that were grouped by quarter. So then about 10 years ago, we said, let's have a curriculum that's created by our teachers who know our kids, who have a strong sense of who our children are. And we created our district units of study at that time. And what we found in the implementation of those district units of study is that, again, we weren't seeing consistency and equity across the district in terms of what kids were actually getting in curriculum. We were really limited by the expertise or the resources or the experience of that teacher in the classroom. And when we think about understanding the cultural identities of our kids, we were limited by that too. So teachers who really understood the cultural identity of our kids were able to provide something for our children that those who didn't weren't providing. So we found ourselves at a really strong place of inequity. What we're doing now in terms of elementary curriculum and instruction is looking for the very best resources that we can find that have been published by content experts who often have a lot of instructional expertise about our children as well. And then we're bringing those to the district and having our teachers then look at those resources to say what's missing, what else do we need to supplement with, so that we know that we are gaining the expertise of people who know their content area, and also then tapping the expertise of our teachers here in the district. Our most recent adoption in ELA, we know we have some incredible authors on that, including Ernest Morel, including Alfred Tatum, including Jim Cummins, who understand the needs of diverse children and kids who are really having some different needs. And so we know that it's grounded on a real understanding of a wide variety of kids. We know that when we looked at that ELA adoption, our initial gate was, will our kids see themselves represented in these materials? Are there multiple ways for us to see windows and mirrors in these materials? And we wouldn't let anything come by that didn't have that idea of windows and mirrors. And we're going to continue to ask that question of, do the people who write these materials understand our children and understand the cultural identities of our children as we move forward and continue to try to get better?
On the secondary lens, I definitely would like to echo, Ann's approach. As I finish up this first year, within the first year in CIA, those are some of the shifts that we took also with this English adoption. And again, as we look at just curriculum overall, we definitely want to look at it as the what, how could we systemically vet these resources, and I think that's what you started to see with the work. So we started to make sure that many stakeholders had a voice within vetting those resources. So you definitely, to your question, who wrote it, and then the experts who share, I would say in short, it would be a no. But we definitely want to make sure that those voices and the expertise, as we bring those together, it is a lot of stakeholders who have a voice. So when we systemically vet that by our teachers, administrators, service providers, students, parents, and we work through that work with equity and instruction, I think that that's how we ensure that our teachers can instruct with a pedagogy that can liberate our students by awakening their critical consciousness. I think that is our overall goal, is that we can awaken that inner voice of our students by making sure they see themselves within the content. They're invigorated and inspired by what they're reading as we look at that English adoption. But again, we know that no model and no curriculum is perfect. So we do have to supplement what we bring to our students. But we got to be willing to have those critical conversations. And what you saw this last year was that we were willing to stand up to some vendors that didn't have just a baseline of conversations or equitable experience to offer to our kids, that we said, you can't come to the table with Wayne Township. And I think as we continue to push that and we draw that line, that's when we push those big vendors to be more responsive and to make sure that they build these curriculums with more of a equity lens. I think what we're coming up on next year is going to be huge. That's So Studies Adoption, because we do have big time vendors that publish one text in Indiana and publish a different text in Texas. And we have to have an impasse of, are we going to put our dollars with someone who is that, I guess you said, just money hungry, that they would, have that difference as far as content, and also the fact they're willing to omit certain pieces of history or rewrite, have a revisionist type of history in those contexts. So again, our goal is to make sure that we awaken that critical consciousness of our students. And again, as we vet these resources, we put a vehicle to make that more possible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you both, Dr. Olson and Mr. Day, just for your level of transparency of how we got here. And one of the words that you mentioned, Dr. Olson, that I just wrote down is the word inequities, that because we know that inequities exist across the board. So this leads me to my next question, and I'll ask Mr. Gardner and Mr. Woodard to answer this. Are you, and again, you're looking at your lens, your sphere of influence. So we're not talking about all test scores, but we are going to talk about test scores here with this next question. Are you, Mr. Gardner and Mr. Woodard, equally concerned about all students' test scores, or are you more or less concerned about some students' test scores, and why? And again, we chose Mr. Gardner specifically and Mr. Woodard because Mr. Gardner oversees our high ability students, and that has always been pretty much a hot topic when it comes to our district equity leadership team. And then Mr. Woodard having that lens at the high school as being the guidance director. So if you wanted to know why, that's why. So Mr. Gardner, if you could go ahead, please, sir.
All right, thank you, Dr. Harris, for the opportunity. It is a hot button issue. I would say, in generally, yes, we're concerned about all test scores, but I think if we look at programming, we need to be talking more intentionally and more focused on what are the groups of students that our tests are either holding back or not identifying to push forward and that sort of thing. So in this situation, when we're talking about high ability in particular, I am much more focused on what are the inequities that the identification process has put into place, and how do we go about dismantling that using the testing systems and the tools that we have in our district and are required to use by state statute to work to identify students of color so that they are participating in and gaining access to programming. And so one of the things that we have done over this past several years, even before I sat in the seat that I'm sitting in right now, was looking at those instruments. So are they instruments that are reliable and are limiting the amount of bias that it often encroaches in testing situations, and then how do we utilize those? And so several years ago, we moved away from student observational testing protocols because we knew that teacher bias could influence those protocols, and so we were inviting more bias into it. So we moved away into what have started using the COGAT, which looks at student potential for high ability, and that is almost 100% nonverbal test to kind of reduce the amount of language bias and language barriers that happen when we have with students in testing. We also have shifted then how we use that COGAT assessment. And so in the past, we used just one score and said the kids who scored in the top whatever on this one score would go into high ability. Now we've broken it down into the individual batteries of assessments so we can look at student strengths. And so is a student showing a greater aptitude or greater potential in math, in verbal reasoning, in nonverbal reasoning, or anything in between, and how can we tailor programming to meet those needs? The next step we took from that was then, if we're using these test scores, are we really utilizing to the maximum potential for our students in Wayne? So we moved away from using national norms and used Wayne localized norms, because we don't need to worry about comparing our students to across the nation. We need to worry about comparing our students in Wayne, because those are the students that we can touch and influence at much higher levels. And so utilizing localized norms allowed us to identify students at a greater scale than what we had in the past. We also moved from using just pieces of the identification tools and to using the full battery for all students, so that students were being given more opportunities to demonstrate potential. We also leaned heavier into potential versus academic achievement, because we also know that equity gaps grow as time goes on when students are in school. And students entering school often come in at different achievement levels because of inequities that persist. And so trying to remove that barrier so that we could identify more students of color and make sure that we were providing services to students, to the students that they need. I'm going down my checklist to make sure I kind of go through the timeline that of things we've done. This year, we will also get away from that. High ability screening has always happened in 2 rounds. The first round was potential, the second round was achievement, and that second round was only, you were only invited to if you were in the top 25%. Well, the top 25% pool is gone now as well. So all students will be participating in all levels of screening at every step of the way. We also added in parent and teacher recommendations on the front end of our screening process, so that we could make sure we were taking a deeper look for students that others were seeing potential in, and not just our testing instruments. So that's kind of how we've walked through how do we break down the barriers that we've put into place because of legislation that we've had to follow. So how do we work within that legislation to the best to meet the needs of our students?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Woodard.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for having me here, Dr. Harris. I'm equally disgusted with all these standardized tests and how they affect our students in different manners. But due to the nature of my job, I have to look at it differently. What I mean, so first I want to say these tests aren't valid. They're not measuring and predicting what they say they're supposed to predict. For instance, the I-STEP supposed to measure Algebra 1 skills. I have students who've passed Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, and Pre-Calc, but has not passed the I-STEP. So I spent a lot of time with those students convincing them that this isn't an intelligent test, prepping them up and showing them how their work ethic, their growth mindset is going to lead them to success. On the other end, with the SAT, the prediction of college retention of 1 year is flipping a coin is almost as successful when you take a student SAT score. And as far as predicting them to graduate in 4 years, it has zero predicted value. So what it does predict, though, is how much money our parents make. That said, it's outside forces that these tests are real and are serious. So if I have a student that scores a 1320 on the SAT and is going to IU, 10 more points is $9,000. So I mean, we have to notice that. We have to tell that student, hey, maybe we can take this again. We can get 10 more points here. At the same time, informing the student that this is not an IQ test. This is not how smart you are or what you do. This is really how much money your parents make. What tickles me with educators, we do the implicit bias test in different training, and educators always come back, oh, that's not me, that's not measuring what it's supposed to. I mean, no way in the world. But then when we get a I-STEP score, that same teacher, oh, this kid, he can't be in my honors class, he hadn't passed this course here. Fortunately, I think society is moving away from this, and we have better opportunities. I mean, we have more schools, universities are test optional. We have the pathways that the state has implemented where we can get students in courses, and the grades and the courses that they take is going to prepare them for life at the high school and also prepare them to be successful at the university. So I'm equally disgusted, but I definitely have to tease out both ends of the spectrum of tests. I mean, so I'm a really high testers, we got to be on them because of the scholarships and opportunities. Some of the testers that are low, I mean, this is graduation qualifying exam. So we have to build supports for them to successfully reach those standards, but also build supports to help them understand this does not name, claim, or make them who they are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your transparency. I think that one of the things that we have learned, hopefully we have learned through this work, as we revisit Glenn Singleton's protocol, is to speak your truth. And I think that that's how we continue to grow. And I think that's how we continue to push one another, is speaking our truth and writing that teeter-totter, that balance of knowing our role as educators, but also being real people, being real parents, being, for some of us, being people of color and having to deal with the challenges that testing has brought to us personally on some levels, and how we have not let that define who we are or who our children are. With that being said, thank you both, Mr. Gardner and Mr. Woodard. And now I'm going to go to Mr. DeWitt, who has boots on the ground as a classroom teacher. And so, Mr. DeWitt, what we want to know from you is, how does the mandated curriculum nurture and cultivate student skills in your content areas? Because as an elementary teacher, we know that you teach more than just one content. But also, as you provide us with that answer, do you agree that these are the most important skills in your discipline areas?
Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday. Thank you, Dr. Harris. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh, you're missing out. I look great today, too. All right. So it is an honor for me to participate in such important work. And this is a huge question that I continue to answer on an individual student basis daily. Every student learns differently based on their personal experiences and cultures. As we teach, I know many teachers try to teach using the term multiple intelligences, or what kind of smart type of smart are you? What this term refers to is teaching students on how they best learn. Do they learn best via video, music, movement, words, pictures, verbal, etc.? So I know it's vital that we build our mandated curriculum around our students' interests and cultures. So I know we have to teach this curriculum, but we got to figure out how to get the buy-in with these kids. What's going to get them engaged with the curriculum? I know it's important for students to see themselves in content as well. And I know that was previously stated by one of my colleagues earlier. So for example, just last week in my classroom, we read the Oscar winner and book Hair Love by Matthew A. Cherry as a mentor text to go along with a lesson in the Pearson reading series to teach how a narrator expresses their 5 senses, whether it be sight, smell, nose, taste, feel, and inner thoughts, as they tell their own personal narratives. And one of my hilarious kids, one of my students of color could easily relate, and many of my students could relate to people of color because the main character is a person of color. And they were just laughing along with it and perked right up, and they were making connections as we were reading. And so the goal was to take what they learned about how narrators express their 5 senses as they tell their own personal stories. One of my students of color last week mentioned that, her hair products that her mommy uses on her hair smells like peaches. So she's going to mention that in her own personal narrative. And I was like, that's great. Awesome. I know that many of your readers will be able to know what that smell and can get what that sense is like. So I agree that we must teach a mandated curriculum, but I think it's just as important, if not more important, to teach based on the students' individual needs and how they best learn, and that they see themselves in the curriculum.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate you. And as always, I always appreciate what you contribute. You've been a part of the district equity team for a long time. And I think that it's important for every member to have a voice and really talk about what they bring to the classroom and how their students respond. And you mentioned making personal connections, which leads me to 2 administrators who have agreed to be a part of our panel this evening, and that is Miss Britton and Mrs. Campbell. And so one of the things, basically, as Jake was talking, it reminded me about a teacher who is culturally responsive, understanding the importance of choosing literature in which students can connect with, having different instructional practices and strategies on a daily basis where students feel like they can connect, whether it be call and response, just different techniques that some teachers just naturally use, but are definitely cultural responsive to the students in whom they serve. So with that being said, Mrs. Britton and Mrs. Campbell, and I'm going to start with Miss Britton, who is an elementary principal at Rhoades Elementary. If you could answer this for me, Miss Britton, and then we'll go to Miss Jackson. Will you speak to the need of cultural responsiveness, but only evaluate teachers on the teaching of skills? And then what do you believe is most valuable to their families?
Good evening. This is an interesting question because I think it looks different on different levels. I definitely speak to the cultural responsiveness from teachers, and I acknowledge it because I let them know I appreciate it. I'm going to acknowledge it as a positive highlight. I do not feel that in an evaluation, we may not have a formal way of evaluating cultural responsiveness. Some schools are different. Like, for example, at Westlake, Dr. Murph, she has a whole walkthrough, that pertains just to that topic. I do not have that. But in my walkthroughs and observations, I make sure that I acknowledge when I see a teacher connecting or having that cultural responsiveness. And it could be very basic, from the classroom environment of what's posted on the walls or on your doors, to, someone mentioned this earlier, the literature that you have your students reading. Do the students see themselves in the text that you are choosing for them to read, and also that you are reading and read alouds? To probably more advanced of letting students utilize their strengths to perform a task that is different from our traditional approach. So I always acknowledge and speak to it. And then sometimes there are opportunities where you can give a moment of growth. Have you thought about, or what about this? But I think it's very important to give staff or teachers real feedback as it pertains to cultural responsiveness. And like I said, it's at different levels. People are at different levels, and it really depends on how you speak to that. But in my role, I feel that it is an important task for me. As for families, they feel it's important. They want to know that their babies are learning and that they are connected at school, meaning that staff have a relationship with them and that they are loved. Because you can be a very skilled master teacher and driving the curriculum and may not have a very connected environment, which will stunt that student's growth from growing to their fullest potential, because we know that relationships matter and how you connect with students matter. So it is very important to speak to their responsiveness.
Mrs. Campbell, I know another Megan Jackson. I'm getting my Megans confused. Sorry about that, Mrs. Campbell.
No problem. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join in on this discussion today. You know, any educator knows that there are so many tangible and intangible factors to the art of teaching. Equity and cultural responsivity are some of those essential parts, and it is often one of the most difficult to really be able to put a check mark in a box and say, yes, this is a culturally responsive lesson that perpetuates equity in the classroom. So to Ms. Britton's point, you know, having that checklist, it's enormously difficult to come up with something that kind of checks the boxes of cultural responsivity. And I appreciate these ongoing conversations, because I think it's kind of helping us get that framework of thinking together as a group as we look toward this. But one essential part of really evaluating for equity and cultural responsivity is digging into the details, because inequities often hide in generalities. For instance, we can look at attendance data, we can look at testing data, we can look at data of who's participating in class, and we can see you know, a really positive trend there in general. And it's not until we look at the specifics that we start to see, but what about this set of students? You know, we see some troubling data when we look at this set of students. And so if we're not looking at those specifics, we are opening ourselves up to inequities if all we're doing is looking in general. As an evaluator, I see a major part of my role as encouraging teachers to dig into those specifics in order to ensure that there is equity in the work that we're doing. I think that this dedication and intentionality is the first step in our journey to equitable outcomes for our students and families. Once we identify these areas of inequities, it is our responsibility to work diligently to eradicate inequitable practices and continue to monitor our work for bias. When we have disproportionate outcomes, the result is that we must be in one of two camps of thought when we are reflective about that. And this is a tough conversation. Either we believe that our students inherently have disproportionate abilities, or we must believe that it is our practices that are creating the inequitable outcomes. Like I said, this is really an uncomfortable and difficult conversation to have. But it is a necessary one if we are going to authentically begin to make a change.
Thank you, Mrs. Campbell. Very well said. Very well said. And I just love how, you know, the questions just kind of flow and just lead right on into the next question. So you mentioned disproportionate outcomes. So Ms. Stegman, as the woman who oversees curriculum instruction and assessment really rests in your department in a lot of ways. It rests right down here in CIA. And so I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at data in this way, but I'm going to go ahead and ask the question anyway. And you can speak to it as best as you can. But what would you say is the trend assessment data for our district? And what has helped and not helped regarding the teaching of skills?
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I think I'm going to join in Mr. Woodard and start out by saying that standardized assessments are biased and utilized to sort and label students in schools. When you look at the last 5 years, the I-STEP and the I-LEARN assessment and accountability system have changed as schools have improved in the system. So as schools improve, the systems change. So when we think about using that data, we have to look at that. Really, I'm going to link on to what Mrs. Campbell said. We want to look at groups of students and say, if the students aren't making it, what is it instructionally we're missing the mark on? And we can't get into the specifics because we know that the tests are biased, but let's step back and look at those groups of students. And let's move to the formative assessment or the local assessments we have that can bring more value to those same students. So when we think about formative data, I think it's really important to keep in mind that when we get to gaps in that data, those are instructional gaps. They're not deficits in the student. They are things that the educator needs to focus on. So as educators, we can best utilize data to reflect on our own teaching practices and our partnerships with students, because oftentimes the students that are not progressing or the groups of students are students we do not have valued partnerships with. Formative assessment has the most potential to positively impact student learning when it's utilized with teachers to partner with students. So students understand the learning goals, they understand their growth towards the goals, and the students are active participants in that. Assessment is only valued by a student when the learning goal is valued by the student. So I think this is an area for continuous improvement as a district. And I think as we look at learning goals and the measures that we're looking at, the results of those measures, I think we have to ask ourselves some really important questions. Are the learning goals valued by the student and built in partnership with the student? Are we measuring knowing in multiple ways? And are we cultivating critical thinking and problem solving within the classroom that students can use for enduring amounts of time? I think this is an area that we'll continue to grow in, and I'm hopeful as we have adopted these new ELA series and the summative assessments and formative assessments that go with them, that they will continue to inform our practices in really positive ways to impact students.
Thank you. You said something, not having valued partners. And I would say that often when we talk about Black, Indigenous, people of color, often families don't feel like they're being valued. They don't feel like they're being listened to. Often we talk at them as opposed to listening to them, and really don't take into account their funds of knowledge in terms of what they bring to school each and every day. So Mr. Brown and Mrs. McCann Thomas, this question is for you because it's very real when I heard Ms. Stegman say not having valued partners. So again, from your lens, from where you sit, how are students and their families identified, honored, and validated in the curriculum? And I'll start with Mr. Brown this time, and then I'll go to Mrs. McCann Thomas.
All right. Hello to everyone. Well, I'm going to start with kind of what Dom talked about, Mr. Day, concerning. I was very glad to hear if they're not bringing that diversity to the table, then we're not purchasing their curriculum. Because we've known this for years, and I'm always perplexed. And why do we keep giving these people money? If we know what the issue is, but we give them millions on top of millions of dollars. So I think when you start to affect their money, then things start to change. So just thank you for saying that, and you guys going through that process. Our students are being identified. I can only say in a very small sense within our curriculum. I know at the high school the last couple of years, they had went to purchasing novels because of the fact that they could not find a curriculum that was diverse enough within their reading. So they purchased their own novels. That has been an excellent area of identity development because those novels, they're inner city, they're Black boys and girls, they're stories of Hispanic boys and girls, things that our children can relate to. Things that, not just your typical, I know some people like the classics and they're in love with the classics, but if you look at it, especially boys don't read a lot of the classic, a lot of the books in high school. So I think because they can't relate, it does not relate to their world. And when you start to get 14 through 18, they want something that they can relate to. So even the black and white kids at Ben Davis High School can relate to a story about an inner city Hispanic kid. I don't have to be that color, but it's still the culture. That's another semi-culture of just the part that it's an inner city kid, whatever the color is. I do think we've been honored some. I know we've had some not honored in the books per se, but honored in the sense of there are certain programs that go on. I know Office of Special Services honors students that have special needs throughout the year. We have LAP night. So we have certain programs in which we honor our students and our families. But once again, they do need to be honored within the curriculum on a daily basis. That identity development will help engage students and help them want to read more, help them want to be engaged in the classroom more. And I'm seeing a third part, just to validate it in the curriculum. Once again, I think when you're missing, you're definitely not validated because I'm missing from the curriculum. So as Don, once again, you guys talk about social studies, before COVID and all the social injustice movements kind of started, I went through my staff to Tulsa race riots. And for social studies teachers themselves not to know about the Tulsa race riots and for it not to be in our history books, that is absolutely, it's incomprehensible. It just is incomprehensible. And it's still not in those history books. And like I said, you even have the teachers who teach history don't know about, one of the biggest catastrophes to Black people in America. So I think we're definitely not validated because we're not even identified. So if you're not identified, you can't be validated.
Thank you. Mrs. McCann Thomas.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I believe our instruction should give students the opportunity to learn about themselves and others. Our literature should be rich with diverse characters and diverse authors. And all content areas should include artifacts to support student learning that represent the cultures in the classroom and that are relevant to students' lives and experiences. Our instruction should give students the opportunity to read and think critically and to question what they're learning in order to dig deeper into the curriculum, but also how it plays out in the intersectionality of their lives. I think we validate and honor our students and our families when we push past the single story of their identity that may or may not be positive and intentionally circulated throughout society. Teaching skills and standards in a way that builds students' social awareness and ability to make change in the world will create a future that has adults who are able to reason and process information in a critical and analytical way and see through more than just their own lens. I think if we're not doing that, then we're failing our students of all colors. And if our Black and brown students do not see themselves in our curriculum, then we are participating in the inequitable practices that send the message that school is not a place that was built for them.
Thank you. Mrs. McCann Thomas, you mentioned the word representation. And this takes me back to Mr. Dominic Day and Dr. Ann Olson. To what level were parents and students involved in the curriculum selection process? When we talk about representation, and again, back to Ms. Stegeman's comment, not having valued partners, could you explain to us to what level were our parents and students involved in the most recent process? Well, I guess for both of you would be ELA. And then if you could, any thoughts about future curriculums or resource, I know we call it resource adoption now, but future resource adoption in terms of more involvement from our parents and our students. And I'll start with you, Mr. Day, as the secondary curriculum coordinator, and then Dr. Olson, you can respond soon after.
Definitely, that term representation is huge, and our voices of our parents and our students is extremely important in this process. Even to speak to Ms. McCann's comment, is not whether they see themselves, but also how they see themselves. And that was something that definitely our students and our staff, our students and our parents were able to push us through this last adoption process. Something that we added new to the secondary adoption process is we held secondary voluntary student focus groups across the district at all the buildings, in which we were able to sit down with groups of students from anywhere from 10 to about 20 in each building to get their feedback on the top 3 finalists for the English adoption resources. And they were able to sit there for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour of dissecting the resource, providing feedback, getting hands-on access to what the digital platform looked like, and also looking through some of the stories. And some of the conversation the kids looked at and gave us was whether they did see themselves. But not only just did they see themselves, but how. Because even our students are frustrated by the stories that they read are about inner city kids who are in gangs and drugs, right? Not hearing about those inner city kids that overcame things too and became something. So they also talked about that, and those things happen organically. So again, to hear that from the students, but then also we had the parent nights. We had 2 parent nights where we got to get some parent feedback where they had the same opportunity. To look at the resources, get their hands on them, but also have a conversation on how would this best meet the needs of their students. We asked them, how does your kid learn best? And will this resource be something that you want your student to learn from? And then why or why not? So that we've definitely wanted that feedback. So we went out and got it, especially from the students where we met them at their respective schools. Each admin team at the buildings set aside time, whether that be during impact or during another period of time in the day for us to have access to that group of kids. And that group of students ranged from your highest level performing students to some of your most struggling students. We even had a group of Thrive students at the different buildings that provided us feedback. We even were at Sanders for about an hour working with Taryn Richard and her students to get some good feedback. So we got a diverse group of learners to give us feedback. So again, those voices are extremely important. And if we omit them from the process, then we're not truly saying that we're having a student-centered approach to curriculum or instruction. So again, I was definitely proud with our department that we moved in that direction, and I think we'll continue to evolve down the line.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Olson?
Sure. Again, I'm going to echo what my colleague, Mr. Day, said. We've been working hard to try to be consistent in how we do things. The direct feedback that we got from secondary directly from students about what they liked was a really fantastic addition that they included in the secondary process. From an elementary perspective, we've been actually using the materials, doing small scale pilots with kids instead of doing that direct feedback. And in the process, really observing to see what are kids learning, how are they learning, what are some of the responses we're getting from kids, so that we don't then end up with materials and kind of wring our hands when we see that they're not meeting our expectations in terms of how kids are responding to those materials. So we embedded that in our last adoption process and had quite a few teachers who said, these materials are really good, but the kids don't like them, or the kids don't want to open this book. And that feedback for us is invaluable. We also learned a great lesson in our last ELA adoption that we're going to continue to build on as we move forward. Rather than including parents in the process all along the way and having them try to dissect materials from the lens of an educator and try to get them really deep in terms of analyzing for standards or analyzing assessments, we said we're just going to bring the parents in at the place where, as someone said earlier, their funds of knowledge are valued. And we can say, we want you to be in a parent role right now and tell us what you see and feel as a parent. And we had several parent nights in our last ELA adoption. And one of the things that I learned a lot from is that the parents who came were the ones who a teacher or an administrator specifically said, we want your opinion, not just a blanket notice in a newsletter or a Parent Square message that went out that said, hey, district textbook review night, but a teacher or an administrator who said to that parent, your insight is what we want tonight. Please join us so that we can get your insight. And the parents who did join us did feel a sense that they had a perspective to offer us that we were lacking. And we asked really, as Mr. Day said, direct questions to try to get at what those parents did have to offer, rather than asking them about things that are really more from an educator lens. Well, I think we're improving on that, but we're going to keep getting better as we learn more, listen more, and grow more there.
Well, it's exciting to hear that we did have some parents engaged in the process, that you all were able to reach out, the schools were able to encourage parents to attend, and parents actually attended the meetings and gave feedback. So that's one part of parent engagement. The other piece of that is then, how do we keep parents engaged with what their students are learning in school? How do we keep them involved to the point where they know what's going on and there really aren't any surprises? Like, you know, the midterm grade is not a surprise. The 9-week grade is not a surprise. What's happening in school is not a surprise. So because of time's sake, I'm going to ask Miss Britton if she would respond to this question, and Mr. DeWitt, if you could respond. How do we keep parents engaged with what their students are learning in school? And I'll start with you, Ms. Britton.
I was having some issues. The families, they have to be involved, even if they do not understand per se how we operate in the school building. I know we have our progress reports. I think teachers do a great job of even like at weekly updates. But one of the things that I changed about my practice is including curriculum and learning opportunities during our PTO events, because our parents were coming, but it was heavily focused on family nights. And that's fine too, family fun. So we started including like, okay, here are some hot topics that are going on in the classrooms or in a specific curriculum. This is how we're teaching math. As the parents say, this new math I don't understand. So we will utilize our math experts in the building and John Albright to just teach a specific skill or a game or something every day that they can include with teaching their children, or just learning how we are teaching them. And also giving them that time to ask questions. We just, I don't want to say we automatically assume, but there are opportunities that parents have that provides feedback for us. We go on with our day-to-day. This is the standard. This is the curriculum. Oh, I might add this. I might add that. But sometimes we're losing families in the process. So having that space for them to ask questions kind of give us a picture of what are we missing from that connection from school to home, and then giving the opportunity to teach our families what we are doing in the building. So inviting them into our worlds, if that makes sense. It is hard. I know we have some of our families and they really feel that my job is home, your job is school. And we know we need that connection to stay aligned for the benefit of students. Those things we can't fight against because it just is what it is. They feel that way. And some parents are intimidated by what we do at school or feedback that we give them. When somebody mentioned before, we kind of talk at them or down to them and not include them in the conversation. So something just as simple as adding it into our PTO made a difference. Having parent groups at my previous school, we had parent focus groups. And sometimes it's hard to hear things because they're providing feedback and we're doing an outstanding job in the area. And they're basically telling us, yes, no, you're not. So taking that feedback and those growing points from a parent's or family's perspective and including it in your school improvement plan and in your day-to-day management of how you do things are important.
Thank you. And so, Mr. DeWitt, unfortunately, because we only have 5 minutes left, we're going to do a whip around to kind of have everyone share their last thought. So we will not be able to ask you, Mr. DeWitt, that question just because I want to make sure that we are always respectful of everyone's time and the time that they give us to join these circles. But instead, We're going to go around, and Jake, I'll have you go first. But if we could, and if everybody could keep it literally to 40 seconds or less so that we can conclude right at 6 o'clock, if you could leave our viewers, those who have joined us, just a last thought in terms of the elephant in curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So take about 15 seconds, think time. I know that's fast. And then I'll start with you, Mr. DeWitt, and then I'll just call you all by name and we'll go from there. Last words for we can't ignore the elephant in curriculum, instruction, and assessment, 40 seconds or less. Mr. DeWitt, you're on.
I think, we need to mention what's happening in the real world in our classrooms. I mean, yes, make it grade level appropriate, but as the students are seeing in our world, they have knowledge on it, they have experience on it, they want to talk about it. So if you can incorporate that into a conversation, SEL, community circle, or even involve that into the curriculum, do it.
Perfect. Thank you. Mrs. Campbell.
I think sometimes that elephant in the room gets so big that it can get hard to breathe. You start to think that maybe you just can't overcome it. But one of the most empowering things I was ever told as an educator is that we are the difference makers. And if I can leave one parting thought, that's what I would leave us with, is that we are the difference makers. The work that we do day in and day out makes the difference. And I think that thought, if we can stare at that elephant and stare it down and say, you know what, elephant, I'm going to make you a little bit smaller today. Man, that's just a really powerful feeling.
Thank you. Mr. Day, 40 seconds, please, or less.
For me, with the elephant in the room, marginalization, omission, and misrepresentation are a battle that we all are in it together to fight against. It is not one person that is responsible for tackling this elephant. We are all in this together and all have equal share to fight this elephant.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner.
I would say that we're all trying to figure out what our blind spots are as we do the work that we're doing in the district, and I rely heavily on my colleagues and those that I work with to point out blind spots when they recognize them, as well as challenge myself to continue my own journey and reading as much as I can so that I can eliminate as many blind spots as that I do have.
Thank you. Ms. McCann Thomas.
First, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Bettina Love states, education is an industry that is driven and financially backed by the realities that dark children and their families just survive. And it is our job to fight against that. And that's in every building and every classroom across our district. Our Black and brown students have to matter, but matter is the minimum. Our students deserve all the opportunities that we can give them to thrive. It is up to us to be advocates for them, and that's in any space that we are in, and we have to be willing to take that charge.
Thank you. Dr. Olson.
I'm thinking about who are the experts and how do I make sure that I am valuing the funds of knowledge and expertise of people from diverse backgrounds and diverse places to make sure that we're all in this together.
Thank you. Mr. Woodard?
For me, I think it's just important for us to remember that this education system and curriculum was created to maintain white supremacy, to maintain resources with white, heterosexual, property owning males. And I think it's important for our students, if we're going to create a more humane space for the young people to understand whose voice is missing. I like when you guys talk about the identity development, but whose voice is missing, where the power is, and how can they utilize their skills to create a more humane society.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Just, for me, it's just put it on the table, continue to call it out. Do not hide it. There's not the right representation. There's the wrong stereotypes, but we have to call it out. We can't just ignore it, and we got to consistently call it out. It can't be once. It has to be consistently called out. Every meeting, every adoption, everything that we talk about that we're working with our students, it has to be called out.
Thank you, Ms. Britton.
We must have courageous conversations, ongoing, be open to change, and sensitive to all levels coming to the table. But not coming to the table is not an option.
Wow, thank you. And Ms. Stegman, if you're still on, you have the last word.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. We have a lot of work to do in this area. There's continued improvements needed and necessary, and I believe we have the team that can continue to make progress and do this work. We're here to get it right, and we're going to continue to work hard until we do. Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Harris.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all. It's 6:01. Not too bad. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time at our Staff Equity Circle. Have a great day. Thank you, panelists.
Bye,
Excellent
everybody.
job.
Thank you. Thank you, Danita.
Thank you, Jake. Have a great day, everyone.